Donald R. Hammond, Esquire, all hell is breaking loose. The summer of love, what was supposed to be the summer of love, has turned into chaos on the streets of America. Our president is sending in federal troops. And I've been quibbling with you, both on the air, so to speak, as well as offline, about when it's required to get a permit. And I've been absolutely outraged. I'm not happy with your attitude. And I still think you haven't even given me a logical explanation as to when it is required. The last time we discussed it, you dismissed me by distorting my opinion, by making it more ridiculous than it ever was, saying it's not necessary to get a permit when you're walking around with a sandwich board on a sidewalk. But I'm talking about when there are large groups of people, when public safety issues come into play, and when issues of sharing space as opposed to monopolizing it come to play. So I challenge you, once again, Don, skip the sarcasm. Skip the distortions. Give me a straight answer. You either think you're never required to get permits, or you're always required, or in some circumstances. I'm pretty sure it's in some circumstances. What are the circumstances?
People are not required to have a permit unless they are required to have a permit, Jeff. And
I went through all that to get that answer.
Exactly. Seriously, if you want to look it up and do the research and show me the statute as to where people are required to have a permit, then you'll have your answer. You're expecting me to do your research for you when you're the one who keeps insisting people need to have a permit to be out there walking down the sidewalk and having a peaceful protest. I say there's no requirement for a permit. If there is such a requirement, then it's going to be codified somewhere. It certainly isn't anywhere that I'm aware of in the California Penal Code. I mean, there's probably there are requirements for permits for public events, but I'm not sure there's a requirement to have a permit for a protest, and then the police declare it unlawful at some point, and then you have a problem. But I don't think that there's a requirement to have a permit. If there's a code section somewhere that requires that, please find it and show it to me. You have the burden of proof on this issue, Jeff.
Okay, fair enough. And I'm pretty sure I can find such statutes, just not right this second. But let's assume you're right then. On what basis am I, a person who's not interested in having a demonstration, or not interested in these people taking away space I'm normally entitled to share, on what basis am I denied use of it if the police are blocking off areas for these protesters to use? What's that all about?
So the police should be keeping people out of the way of traffic and things like that. I don't disagree with you there. But I don't think there's any reason to, I mean, if they want to, the police's job is to keep these people, out of the way, but the police can also shut down streets for any number of reasons. I mean, they shut down streets to do road work. They shut down streets for parades that happen. They shut down streets for all kinds of reasons. And if they deem that it's appropriate to shut down the streets and the local government agrees that it's right to shut down the streets for some limited period of time to allow people to walk down the street and have their protest, then that's what they're going to do. And I don't think that that's necessarily a problem.
Okay, just one more point. You mentioned that you think permits are sometimes required for events. So I'm not really sure what the distinction is between an event or a protest. To me, a protest is an event. You have a public park, which on one day might be used for a concert. On another day, it's more of a protest. So if you need the permit when the quote unquote event is a concert, why wouldn't you need it when it's quote unquote a protest?
I think the difference is a business purpose where they're putting on a concert to make money or have people reserve tickets in advance and things like that, versus more of a spontaneous event where a bunch of people show up and they all happen to be there, marching around yelling. That's a different type of event than what you'd require a permit for, where you're going to, set up bleachers and have a concert in the park. That's a totally different type of thing.
I'm not sure why First Amendment rights should be based on money, number one. And number two, there are plenty of concerts that are free. And I don't think that if Paul Simon wants to do a concert in Central Park, he can just do it on his own. I think he needs the city to approve of it. But I will take your challenge and do more research. That is fair. And I sprung that on you without any warning. That's fair too, because it's within your expertise, right?
Close enough.
Close enough. All right. So let's take a look at what's been going on in Portland. It would be better if we had somebody from Portland who could really describe in detail how bad it's been or how bad it hasn't been. But suffice to say, there has been civil unrest to some extent, something that we could fairly call peaceful demonstrations on occasion. On other occasions, it's escalated to what might be called riots. And it's been going on for 2 months in Portland. So let's take a look at a couple of things from the past few.
This is the Portland Police Bureau. This is a residential area. We noticed criminal activity occurring in this crowd. If you attempt to breach and enter the BPA office, you'll be subject to arrest or use of force. This is the Portland Police Bureau. This event is perceived a riot. Move to the east now. If you do not move to the east, you'll be subject to arrest and or use of force. This is the Portland Police Bureau.
Now, that's an example of what we were just talking about. The protesters gathered, and for some period of time, it was, I suppose, relatively peaceful. And then it escalated. A police union building was set on fire, and the police declared an unlawful assembly. And we just saw footage of, I guess, some combination of federal officers and Portland police officers forcing the crowd to disperse. So what is going on with these federal officers? Or do you want to just say a few words about what we just saw in that footage first?
Well, in that particular footage, the majority of the violence or unrest that I see there is on the part of people wearing uniforms. The people on the street appear to be trying to get out of the way. There was a fire there. It's not clear who set that, but whether it was caused by police flashbang grenades or if it was something that the protesters had set in the street or inside that police headquarters. I'm sure there's more footage somewhere to show how that stuff got created. And it's unclear from that footage who those people in uniform are, whether they're locals or whether they're some sort of federal agents. And I think that's a problem, that we can't tell, from any distance who these people are who are out there supposedly attempting to keep order or enforce laws.
Yeah, that's one of the issues that has gotten a lot of commentary. So let's talk about that. I definitely can see that it's problematic to not be able to identify police officers, because if you can't identify them and they do something wrong, it's difficult, if not impossible, to then hold them accountable. Who do you hold accountable if you can't identify them? But is it required by law for police officers to identify themselves?
It certainly should be. I'm not sure that there is a law on the books, but as a part of this police reform movement, that should be added to the list of things that we do, is make sure that there's something on every law enforcement officer at every level that allows the public to identify who they are. That's a good tenet to add to the list.
Well, what about the whole? I mean, we're not talking about only this situation in Portland, which you obviously have some feelings about. We're talking about laws that would apply to all situations. So
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I mean is every officer at every level all the time should be wearing something that identifies them. And then there could be exceptions for undercover work,
that's
obviously.
what I was getting.
But anybody who's out on patrol and acting in their law enforcement capacity to actually, interact with citizens and move citizens around, I mean, they should be identified. If somebody tries to pull me over and I can't identify them as an officer, I'm not pulling over. I'm sorry. Maybe I'll call 911 and try to verify, but it's ridiculous to expect citizens to just, obey somebody when they can't tell who they are.
Yeah, well, that's a different issue, and I agree. There should be no obligation to comply with someone who is not clearly a law enforcement officer. They might be a white supremacist, or they might be anybody other than a law enforcement officer. But that's a different issue, other than whether or not it should be required by law. Now, I've already acknowledged that I see why it's problematic. I have. But there is that issue of undercover work, and you have just conceded it is legitimate in some cases. But don't you think you just made a distinction, but isn't there a thin line between whatever you have in your mind as being appropriate undercover work and just being on patrol? I mean, there are people who have caused, are guilty of arson, vandalism, violent crimes in association with these protests that have been going on. Is it not legitimate to be using undercover cops to try to catch them?
I have not seen any evidence that any police department is doing that, but that's part of the nature of undercover work, that they may have officers embedded in the crowd. But those officers are going to call for uniformed backup to do any kind of crowd control mission. The undercover officers may be there to identify or to observe and report so that they can make a case later. Undercover officers aren't just going to, spring out like Superman. Surprise! Here's my law enforcement credentials. Now we're into crowd control mode. And they're certainly not going to try to do crowd control or dispersal while wearing civilian clothes when they're not identifiable. I mean, these people in their camo uniforms and everything are, they're identifiable as some sort of officer from some level, but to the point that you made, that they need to be identifiable to the point where we can hold them accountable if they're not acting appropriately. I mean, so we can't figure out who they are. We can't hold them accountable. I think that's a problem. Then that's a totally different thing than people who are, embedded into a gang for 3 years to try to gather evidence and take it down from the inside and then end up testifying against them. That's a totally different situation than this type of crowd control dispersal.
Amy Segro. That can't be an actual name. SGRO. What is that? I feel like I'm being assaulted with consonants. Amy asks, what happens when people who are in armed cars are set on fire? Does that condone the use of unarmed cars?
That doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not sure what an armed or unarmed car is, or an armed car is in.
I think she meant people.
I can't even make sense of that.
I think she meant what happens when cops who are in unmarked cars are assaulted. I don't know.
It looks like she's posted an amended question here. What happens when marked police cars are set on fire and stomped on? I mean, I think the answer is no. I mean, I don't necessarily object to them using resources that are available. I mean, I object less to unmarked cars than to unmarked people. The cars themselves are not going to violate anyone's rights or do things improperly. It's the people who are in them who are going to do that. And we should be able to identify who the people are, who those agents are, who are, jumping out of the cars and grabbing people and those kinds of things. They should be identifiable. I object less to the use of an unmarked car. I mean, every police department has what they call DB cars. They're detective bureau cars that are, not really marked, but you can just see that they have lights in the window and things like that. That doesn't bother me.
All right, Mark Morgan, a big shot with the Custom and Border Patrol, one of the federal agencies who are on the scene, tweeted as follows: "Our personnel are clearly marked as federal law enforcement officers and have unique identifiers. You will not see names on their uniforms because these same violent criminals use this information to target them and their families, putting both at risk. As acting commissioner, I will not let that happen." So he's not specific about what a unique identifier is, but I suppose that means numbers. What do you think, Don?
Well, a name is, well, no, what he's saying is that
they don't have names. Rather than names, they have unique identifiers because he's trying to protect them.
So I think what I get out of that is that they have patches, and you can see on their uniforms that there's some sort of a patch that identifies, I guess, what agency they're from. Mm-hmm. And certainly that's appropriate, but they should also have their name there. I mean, especially if these are federal officers being bussed in from who knows where, flown in. I mean, I think it's incredibly rare. I'm not aware of any incidents of citizens, looking up police addresses and then going and doing something to them at home. You don't see those kinds of things happening in the media very often.
A judge just had her husband and son shot in New Jersey over the weekend, who was assigned to the Jeffrey Epstein case, well, the Deutsche Bank case associated with Jeffrey Epstein, but that may be an exception. What it sounds like you're not sure about what the unique identifiers are, Don, but let's suppose they're numbers. Is that not as good as a name, or what?
I think that is less preferable, but certainly, if people taking video can somehow identify a number on the uniform and then that can be linked back to an officer, you're getting closer to something that's maybe okay, but yeah, it's still problematic. I think you want to be able to say Officer Jones beat the crap out of this guy and shouldn't have.
I'm sorry, I talked over you. Say that again, Don.
Oh, you want to be able to look at somebody's uniform and be like, oh, that's Officer Jones from Customs and Border Patrol. That he beat the crap out of somebody and shouldn't have. We're going to file a lawsuit. You shouldn't have to go through hoops and say officer number 8743, and it's problematic.
Meaning that you think it's easier to remember a name than it is to remember a number.
Sure. And in the footage that we've seen, I don't see anything on those uniforms other than a subdued patch that makes it very difficult to even determine what agency they're from.
Right, but this guy is really setting himself up for trouble if he's just telling an outright lie, because there are lawsuits that are going to be filed. There is video, and there is special technology that can zoom in, and that issue can be clarified. Whether or not they really do have identifying names. So I don't know. Maybe he is lying, but. It's not going to
look forward to seeing that, because nothing I've seen gives, nothing I've seen about those uniforms gives any indication as to any way of identifying any individual.
All right. What do you think about the presence?
And by the way, the agency is then going to hide behind that same line when the citizen sends a Public Records Act request or even a subpoena to say, okay, we've identified that Officer 4378 did X. Please tell us who this person is. They're going to say, oh, no, we can't tell you that because that's a security issue and we're going to have problems. And, they're going to hide behind the same thing. So that doesn't do any good.
Right. Well, presumably at some point, judges will weigh in on that, correct?
Sure. 2 years from now, some judge will say, CBP, you got to tell them who that guy is. And then they'll figure it out. But we shouldn't have to go through those steps to identify officers.
Okay. What do you think, just apart from the specific issues we've been discussing so far, what do you think about just the mere fact these federal officers have been brought into Portland and, let's assume, just put aside for a moment the issue of how they're conducting themselves. Do you have any beef with, any inherent beef with them being on the scene?
Yes.
And would you be willing, if I asked you nicely, to tell us what that beef is?
Well, it's a question of what their jurisdiction is or their authority to be there. Are they enforcing some federal law or protecting some federal property? And if they are, then, they can do that. But if they're there, generally on the streets trying to clear the streets of Portland when they haven't been asked to be there by the local authorities, I think that's a problem. We live in a country of federalism where the federal government is not necessarily supreme, and we leave local, we leave things to be decided and handled at as local level as possible. And it's appropriate to let the locals deal with it. And if the locals aren't asking for help, then it's not the role of the federal government to just come in on its own. And it's a question of what federal law are they enforcing, or what federal property are they defending? I did see some reports that they were defending, I guess, a federal courthouse that's in the area. Great. Surround the courthouse, protect it. They're allowed to do that. If people are threatening that courthouse, or they're going to graffiti that courthouse, the federal government absolutely has jurisdiction on that land to do that. But in terms of just clearing the streets of Portland, I don't think they have jurisdiction to do that.
All right. Well, you clarified what I was wondering in the middle of that response, which is, are you objecting to it as being bad strategy, or are you saying they don't have the authority? And I think you clarified you don't think they have that authority.
Well, I think there are actually three completely distinct questions going on here, right? There's a question as to what the law actually is. There's a question as to what the law should be in our, republic. And then there's a question of optics and, what looks appropriate to the public. So those are really
let's address it on all levels, and be clear with our audience which is which when we're opining. So let's start with authority. You're saying they're in violation of the law unless they're protecting federal property, or am I misunderstanding?
Right. If they're protecting federal property or enforcing some federal law, then they have the jurisdiction to do that. I can't imagine a federal law that is being broken by these protesters unless they're, it would overlap with the federal property protection.
Right. Well, they may be looking for suspects connected with crimes committed on federal property. They don't have to just stay right on the property. Aren't they allowed to go look for suspects?
They can conduct an investigation and go attempt to interview suspects and those kinds of things. But that looks different than, firing flashbangs and tear gas at a crowd. That's a different thing than looking for a suspect.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, I'm talking about when they're away from federal property. It might be perfectly legitimate to fire a non-lethal ammunition at a crowd if it's to protect federal property, right? At least conceivably.
Sure. If the crowd is on the steps of a federal courthouse, then sure, they're within their rights to protect that federal courthouse.
Okay. And so they're vulnerable to lawsuits, or what I don't want to say I don't believe you because you're the expert and I'm not. But honestly, the reason I'm a little bit skeptical is the local authorities have not, so far as I know, been screaming, it's illegal, it's illegal. What they have been screaming is, we don't want you, we don't want you. You follow what I'm saying, Don? Are they not aware of these laws, or am I just not aware of how the federal authorities are raising their objections?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I do believe the local authorities are saying they don't want the feds there. And I think that means the feds should stick to protecting federal property and not clearing streets.
Let me simplify the question. There's a difference between the locals saying they don't want the feds there and saying you don't have the authority to be here. And what I'm telling you is, it sounds to me like what they've been saying is they don't want them there. Doesn't sound like they're saying you don't have the authority to be here.
Okay.
And have you noticed that, or no?
I haven't followed everything that the Portland mayor has said. I think that there are issues of authority, and I think that there are separate issues certainly of wanting them there. And it's interesting to point out, we had issues a month or so, 2 months ago, maybe, of, National Guard and those kinds of things. And we talked about things like the Insurrection Act and, issues with bringing in the military. This looks like the federal government's answer is the end around of, oh, well, we won't use military troops. We'll use federal law enforcement officers to come in and, under the guise of enforcing some federal law. I don't dispute that a federal law enforcement can walk down the streets of Portland. Sure, they can be there.
Well, there are drug laws that are federal. I'm not at all saying every one of these protesters is involved in drugs, but I think there are some possibilities to consider. There are, I think, federal terrorism laws that could apply. Are there not racketeering laws that are federal that could possibly apply?
There are a variety of federal laws, but they all have some hook as to interstate commerce or some sort of federal basis for it to be, a federal issue. Somebody, graffitiing a wall of a private business in Portland is not a federal issue. I'm not aware of any federal law that breaks. So it's not a federal law enforcement officer's role to get involved in that.
Yeah, well, I don't think that anybody's going to argue that this is all about graffiti. This is rhetoric that people use to excuse the behavior of the protesters. Another reason that I'm a little skeptical of your claim that this is, that they lack authority is how openly Trump is saying he's going to do more of the same in other cities. So if you're right, any minute now, we should be hearing from all the anti-Trump lawyers and the ACLU and everybody to make this assertion in courts that that they're lacking authority. Here is what President Donald Trump said earlier today about going into other cities.
In other cities that are experiencing violence. There was a report out this morning that you're considering sending 175 federal troops to these cities to help local law enforcement. Can you fill us in on that?
Well, it depends on what your definition of troops is. We're sending law enforcement. Portland was totally out of control. The Democrats, the liberal Democrats running the place, had no idea what they were doing. They were ripping down for 51 days, ripping down that city, destroying the city, looting it. The level of corruption and what was going on there is incredible. And then the governor comes, oh, we don't need any help. How about Chicago? I read the numbers were many people killed over the weekend. We're looking at Chicago too. We're looking at New York. Look at what's going on.
So what are you planning to do?
Well, I'm going to do something that I can tell you, because we're not going to let New York and Chicago and Philadelphia, Detroit and Baltimore and all of these, Oakland is a mess. We're not going to let this happen in our country.
So, there's a lot of strong feelings about this. And, I applaud you, Don, for making a distinction between, what's good policy versus what authority there is. But you see what I'm talking about? How, I think it's fair to be wondering whether or not they really lack authority, considering how openly it's being done. And we're not hearing that much in the way of big-time challenges to that authority.
Well, the ACLU has filed a lawsuit based on what's going on in Portland, and they've requested a preliminary injunction against the federal law enforcement authorities for the things that they're doing up there. So there is a challenge that, to be fair, that lawsuit, I read a significant portion of the complaint, and the request for TRO is largely based on suppression of media issues, that these officers are indiscriminately, taking out media in their sweep of the streets. So it's mostly First Amendment media based that the ACLU has filed their lawsuit.
My friend Ramona asked that we do a better job of explaining legal terms. And I told her, good suggestion, we'll try to do that. TRO is a temporary restraining order, correct?
That's correct.
Which is an order from
that would be it.
Saying, right. Don't do that, right?
Right. So that's a temporary restraining order is usually something that would exist while a case is pending. So they show that there's a reasonable probability of success on the merits of the case. So a judge says, all right, we're going to go ahead and issue an injunction to stop this conduct from happening while we figure out the case. So it's sort of an emergency order from a judge to say, stop suppressing the media, stop doing what you're doing.
All right. So let's take a look at this question from Shawnee Bruce. Never trust somebody whose last name is a first name unless it's Norman. If LAPD was required to deal with a consent decree based on lack of action for specific officers' actions, could federal officers intervene?
So the consent decree is something that happened from the courts. So you have the judicial branch of government saying, hey, LAPD, fix it, clean it up, do it right. That's a different thing than the executive branch of the federal government coming in and doing something. I think before
the answer is no, they couldn't.
I don't think that they could just send in federal law enforcement to patrol the streets of Los Angeles. I don't think federal officers, I don't think federal officers have the authority or the jurisdiction to implement or to enforce state laws. That's not part of their charter. So, so a federal, an FBI agent walking down the streets of Los Angeles doesn't get to arrest somebody for a DUI. It's a state law.
Could they arrest somebody for a state law and turn it over to the local authorities?
I don't think they can. I think that where you see what would be appropriate is when local authorities request the help, you'd have federal law enforcement coming in to assist with things like crowd control, but any arrests would actually be made by the state level officers or local authorities who are responsible for enforcing state law would make the arrest and then be the ones to go ahead and testify in court.
Well, arrest is a little tricky word, I think, because there is a point where you detain somebody and then there's a point where you formally press the charges, right? So if police are assisting, that would entitle them to detain somebody, right?
Probably. I think that detention would be okay with then the local authorities coming to actually make any arrest or initiate a prosecution if there's going to be one.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is this comparable to what happens when cities within a state ask other agencies to assist them? Or even if they don't ask them, they just do anyway. Maybe there's a car chase that goes from one city into another, or, during the riots, they had various police departments from other cities going to other cities.
Sure.
Did they have the authority? Is it comparable to that? And did they have the authority to make arrests on their own, or would they have to wait for the locals?
So within California, the California Penal Code authorizes any police officer within the state of California to enforce California law anywhere within the state of California, with very few exceptions. So, a Torrance police officer assisting LAPD is still within his legal authority to make an arrest in the city of Los Angeles, even though he works for the Torrance Police Department.
All right, but you're saying they don't have the feds don't have the authority to make arrests in the states unless it's an arrest for a federal offense.
Correct.
Okay. So what happens after an arrest? Like, aside from the issue of jurisdiction, let's just say in general, do the police have the obligation to identify themselves at some point? Do they have the obligation at some point to explain what the arrest is for? And how soon do they have to do that?
Well, yes and no. It's really a case-by-case basis, getting into the weeds in terms of, they should certainly identify that they are police officers and that they have the authority to make that arrest, although there is such a thing as a citizen's arrest. I could come over there and arrest you right now if I wanted to, Jeff, but I lack some of the protections that officers have in terms of qualified immunity, and you could certainly sue me for false arrest much more easily than you could sue a police officer for that. That clouds the issue, of course. And they
Well,
should.
maybe I should show this footage. It might help people understand the question and give you something to hang your hat on as far as giving us a meaningful answer. This is footage that has made the rounds quite a bit on the internet. There's been a lot of complaints that the police are snatching people off the street, kidnapping them, and so forth and so on. And here is one particular incident that's gotten a lot of play.
What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing?
I haven't done anything wrong.
Use your words.
What's going on, Truman?
What is going on?
We need to know.
Who are you?
Why are you taking?
NLG will get you out. What's your name? Tell us your name.
What's your name?
Okay, you're fine. We'll get you out.
Bro, what?
We got you, friend.
We got you.
Oh, fuck.
NLG.
You just violated their rights.
Oh. Kidnapping people.
You just violated their rights.
Thanks for keeping them fucking. Oh.
Now, right off the bat, regardless of what that was about, and we can speculate on it, I would say these onlookers don't know what they're talking about, because I'm pretty sure the police have no obligation to explain to schmoes standing by the side of the road with cell phones what they're doing, correct?
That's correct. They don't have to explain to anybody else. And I don't think that they actually have to tell the person. I mean, they have to say that, you're under arrest, and they certainly should identify why. But that's, if they're going to bring a case, an arraignment has to happen very quickly. And an arraignment is where somebody is advised of what the charges against them actually are. Very often I see paperwork from police agencies when my clients are released that bears very little resemblance to what my client actually ends up getting charged with. The police very often will write, say in a domestic violence case, the police are going to write that it's a 273.5, which is a felony domestic violence. Very, very often, once that case is reviewed by prosecutors and it gets filed in court, it's something completely different. It's a vandalism or a 243E1 assault. It's something totally different than what the police wrote on the paperwork. And, so then at arraignment, they get advised of exactly what the charges are and what's going on. And then we can work from there. I put very little stock in what the police tell my client they're arresting them for. It doesn't mean much to me at all.
Right. And your perspective is the attorney's perspective. From the arrestee's perspective, it can be pretty unsettling, and it seems unfair to not give some sort of an explanation. But it seems like there may not be a legal obligation that quite matches with what would be reasonable and fair, because they don't really have to explain until the arraignment. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything that requires a law enforcement officer to tell somebody, why they're being arrested. I think it's good policy, certainly, to tell somebody why they're being arrested. And I think that there may be an issue of department policy.
Even once they've been brought to jail, there's still not an obligation, correct? They're entitled to an arraignment within a certain amount of time, and they have to say then, but they don't really have to say before then. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a legal obligation to tell somebody until they get to arraignment, which is usually within a couple of days at the outside maximum.
Yeah. Many years ago, I was arrested in Idaho. I was doing a hidden camera prank for a Fox TV special, and it's possibly the longest hidden camera prank ever, certainly one of the longest ones. It went on for 4 days. And it ended when I was on a bullhorn. I won't bore people with all the details, but the point is, when I got on a bullhorn and started saying various things, shortly after that, the police came, and I was arrested and hauled off to jail, and I was charged with disturbing the peace. So I'm not sure what they told me right when they arrested me, but for months afterwards, I couldn't get anything out of the people in Idaho other than disturbing the peace. The point being, I did a whole bunch of different things over the course of those 4 days. And it was just enraging me that they didn't tell me what. Like, how are people supposed to prepare a defense if the people accusing you of a crime won't even specify what the supposedly unlawful activity is? It makes no sense.
That certainly is a concern. And, you don't need to prepare a defense before you're arraigned, certainly. And at arraignment, the government gives the defense, a pile of documents, including a police report. And, I actually believe that charges should be filed with more specificity than they are. They'll say that, on July 20th, 2020, Mr. Hammond, did something in violation of Penal Code Section 415. Okay, well, what is that something? And I think that they should be pled with more specificity. And sometimes I have to bring a motion for a more particular statement to try to figure out exactly what conduct the government is alleging violated the statute. And, usually we can talk about it between the attorneys and try to figure out and narrow down exactly what conduct they believe is at issue. But, I have a DUI manslaughter case open right now where the government says, to prove this all gets way into the weeds, Jeff, but to prove a DUI manslaughter or a felony DUI, they have to prove more than just a DUI where someone died. They have to prove there's an additional negligence or intentional act in violation of law element there. And so I'm asking the government, well, what is the additional act? You're alleging that he drove under the influence and that someone was killed. Okay. What is the additional act to satisfy the statute?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Sometimes I have to file a motion to get the judge to order them to tell me what the additional act is. Because they won't do that.
Just naming a crime, is ridiculous. So I think this person on Twitter or Periscope, Boston T1, is touching on what I was alluding to earlier. They are enemy combatants. Antifa, a terrorist organization, different game, Gitmo candidates. All right, despite the inflammatory rhetoric here, I think he or she is pointing to something that might be the explanation, which is there are federal laws pertaining to terrorism, correct?
There are.
But you don't think they apply, or you're highly skeptical?
I am skeptical as to whether they apply to people who are, gathered on the street and protesting. I mean, there's certainly a question as to how peaceful these people are being up there.
Why do you keep doing that?
It's a local law enforcement issue.
Why do you keep pretending that it's only about peaceful protesters? Nobody is claiming that some of the behavior isn't peaceful. We agree. I think this is about the behavior that's not peaceful. The arson and the vandalism and whacking people and so forth.
You mean the government whacking people and shooting at
No,
people and all those things? Yes, that's problematic.
No. I'm talking. You know what I'm talking about. Why won't you address it? Why does it pain you to address that or acknowledge it?
Because I think it doesn't. I mean, I think most of the people out there are peaceful, and when there are instances that are not peaceful, then law enforcement needs to deal with that. Absolutely.
Well, yeah. So the point is, some federal terrorism laws might apply, and that's what I was trying to get you to address. And instead, you started talking about how a lot of people are peaceful. Well, I wasn't suggesting that the peaceful ones are subject to terrorism.
Show me the statute that you want me to talk about and analyze whether this conduct meets that statute. Happy to do it.
Well, I don't know that I have to meet that burden every single time. I'm asking, you don't deny that there are federal terrorism statutes, do you?
There are federal terrorism statutes. I don't know exactly what they say, and I don't know whether this conduct violates them. I doubt that it does.
Okay. Amy says no, Mr. Hammond. So there you go. If that settles it. Just no. That's the same word in English, Spanish, and French. Just plain no. Jimmy Caples from the South. They are not gathered on the street protesting. Looting and arson are not protests. Well, that's what I was trying to tell my friend Don.
There is some criminal element out there who are doing things that go beyond protesting. Absolutely. And that should be handled by local law enforcement. Right.
But what if it's not? I mean, I think that's the allegation, at least.
Police.
It's not as if this is just a one-day thing. In Portland, it's been going on every day for 2 months. In Seattle, they took over a whole 6-block neighborhood for I don't know how long. That's pretty aberrational behavior, Don, right?
Well, police are a reactionary force from the start. So, there's no evidence that they're not going to go after these people. Certainly there's plenty of video of what's happening on the streets, and law enforcement has access to that. And they may very well go find people who are committing arson and being violent and prosecute them later on. That's what the police do.
Okay. Well, I think we can agree on one thing, that if the feds lack authority to do what they're doing, there are a number of very competent attorneys and as well as prosecutors throughout this nation who aren't shy about fighting the Trump administration, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
So then,
and let me be clear. I don't think this is just about the Trump administration. I think it's about the role of the federal government in our system. I think that, things should be handled at the lowest level possible, and that, local law enforcement should be responsible for handling these things.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, you were clarifying what's motivating your take on it, and that's fair. Okay. But as far as what this societal controversy is about, it's largely about Trump. And we all know that the ACLU and others have filed a number. By the way, you mentioned there was an ACLU lawsuit. Can you tell us? I don't know if you've read the complaint. Do you know what the gist of it is?
It's mostly complaining about things that, so there was an ACL lawsuit against the Portland Police Department originally. And then once the feds showed up, they expanded it to include the feds. So they're on a second amended complaint right now. They already have a restraining order against the Portland Police Department, and now they're trying to expand that to the federal officials also. And they're complaining about the treatment of members of the press. That the police are clearing out people who are clearly marked as press. They're spraying them with tear gas and firing rubber bullets at them, and doing things to suppress the press's ability to cover what's happening within the protests, as well as their ability to cover the government response to the protests. So that's the gist of the lawsuit is, hey, let the press do their job, which I think is totally appropriate.
Well, yeah, except that we don't know the details of what the evidence shows. But I agree. That's a very interesting angle. But you could imagine how there are situations on the street where it's not always apparent who is press and who isn't. And you could also imagine that there are members of the press who don't always behave themselves, right?
Yeah, the complaint actually has embedded photos that make it pretty clear that these people are, they're wearing press vests and legal observers. So actually what we heard in that video of the grab the guy off the street video that you showed was National Lawyers Guild legal observers, or who you heard shouting, saying
NLG. Yeah.
Right. That's the National Lawyers Guild. And they wear vests that are identifying them as legal observers. So that's part of what's mentioned in this federal lawsuit by the ACLU, is that they're suppressing the press, and they're also using force against these legal observers who are there to watch the government. And presumably these people are not participating in the violence or doing illegal things while they're trying to observe. Maybe they are, and they should also be treated as criminals, but I don't think they are.
There's probably a whole bunch of different incidents that maybe you can't sum up succinctly, but can you try a little bit to say, is this lawsuit alleging more that they're shooing them away, or is it worse than that? Are they arresting NLG and or press people?
Well, they're spraying them with tear gas, shooting them with less lethal ammunition, and just wrapping them up with everybody else, as they're clearly identified as press, saying, hey, I'm watching what's happening here, I'm reporting it. and then they're just being treated like everybody else on the street as the cops are trying to clear the street, and that's interfering with their ability to do their job that is protected by the First Amendment.
Okay. Before we wrap up, I would like to take another look at that snatch video, so to speak, because I saw a very interesting interpretation of it, and I want to see whether or not you agree with it. And I'll tell you the interpretation first before I show it. And that is that what looks like an arrest may not actually be an arrest. That might be a rescue of either an undercover cop or a civilian who's working as an informant, because what you can see is a little bit of a hand gesture from one of the cops, and then it's a pretty gentle arrest. There are no handcuffs used. You don't see body language like, hey, what's going on? They just very gently walk the gentleman over to the car. And so it looks to me like, yeah, maybe that really was not even an arrest. Let's take a look. Tell me what you think.
What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing?
I haven't done anything wrong.
Use your words.
What's going on, Selma?
What is going on?
We need to know.
Who are you?
Why are you taking?
NLG will get you out. What's your name? Tell us your name.
What's your name?
Okay, you're fine. We'll get you out.
Bro, what? Alright,
We got you, friend.
we got you.
Oh fuck!
NLG.
You just violated their rights.
Oh, it's kidnapping people.
You just violated their.
What do you think about that theory, Don?
I mean, I don't doubt that kind of thing can happen. I don't see anything happening right there that would require any kind of rescue. I mean, the street looks pretty empty. What I get from that is that whoever these law enforcement people are have conducted some sort of an investigation and have decided that this is a guy that they want to pick up and talk to for whatever reason, and so they're doing that. It doesn't look like he's in need of any kind of a rescue. He's not in a crowd. He's not being trampled. There's just no reason for that.
That's true. So that would be a reason to reject the theory. But what about the part that it was gentle? It didn't seem to be too surprised. No handcuffs. Is that common with arrests?
I mean, you have a lot of things that are not common with I mean, your average arrest. Yeah, it's a one-on-one situation, one or two cops with one person that they suspect of doing something, and this is a different situation than your normal common thing. What I would expect to see from those feds is probably zip ties rather than regular handcuffs, as they're pretty quickly getting people out. I didn't see that happen there. Who knows what happens when they got him into the van?
Yeah.
It does. I mean, if you're going to be arrested, and a lot of these protesters know and expect to be arrested, that's part of what they're doing. That's the way to do it, is go peacefully. You don't want to fight and create a situation where they're going to have to use force on you to make the arrest. You let them take you in if that's what they're going to do, and then you fight it out in court.
Right. Well, I think that's good advice for anybody who's arrested, because there's not much chance it'll be a good outcome if you resist.
No, go peacefully.
On the other hand, I think you would normally see at least a little body language that suggests surprise, or asking what's going on, that kind of thing, something short of resisting.
Well, they're walking toward him. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know which way to put that. Most people who are arrested know why they're being arrested, and they know that they're about to be arrested. I mean, this guy's there on the street. These agents are walking toward him. He knows what's about to happen, and he probably knows why. So he's like, all right, well, I haven't done anything. I haven't done anything. He's kind of putting on a show there, but he knows what's happening. And he's, may not be his first arrest. It'd be interesting if we could track who that is. If
I'd love to find out.
It sounds like maybe he said his name and it was blacked out because the NLG people asked for his name and then said, okay, we got you. So maybe there was a name said that was edited out of the video. I'm not real sure, but they seem to.
I heard that. I know what you mean, but it seems like very unlikely that whatever his name was, they could just very clearly hear. And I don't think they would block it out anyway. I mean, the
Yeah, I don't
idea
know. It
they're
would
trying to-
certainly be interesting to have some follow up and find out who that is and what, if anything, he's eventually charged with, and get some follow up on that story.
Yeah, the same goes for all the people who are being arrested. There's a lot of inflammatory rhetoric being used about people disappearing, and it's all mysterious. But I don't know that anybody's actually been disappeared. Like I haven't heard about any friend or loved one of somebody who has reported somebody actually has disappeared, literally, like they haven't seen them in days. I have heard that they brought people in and then released them without charges, but still not too many specifics on that. But it'll be interesting when we get some more of those specifics.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything either about people just being disappeared off the street and never heard from again. That would certainly be more concerning than what has been happening.
Yeah, and snatching and kidnapping. Well, I mean, when people are arrested and brought to jail, they're always kidnapped and snatched. If you're going to use that.
Well, certainly. I mean, kidnapping to me is a legal term, and taking somebody against their will without lawful authority. And the police have lawful authority to make arrests, assuming they have probable cause to make the arrests.
Right.
That's not a kidnapping.
All right. Well, the Summer of Love is continuing to be very interesting. The very stable tweeter left no doubt that the plan is to send federal officers into other cities as well. Criminal defense hero Don Hammond says it's not legal. Maybe that is why you're the hero for criminal defendants. You are sticking up for them. And let's take a closer look at it. I accept your challenge to be a little bit more diligent about what statutes might apply. And before we sign off, is there anything else on your mind? Did we cover this topic thoroughly, in your opinion, Don?
I think we have it covered. There are a couple of more comments here. Amy wants us to address their uniforms. I mean,
let's get to that.
I'm not
then.
sure that means the federal agents are certainly wearing their camouflage uniforms with subdued insignia that makes them difficult to identify. I think there was a comment earlier, maybe that was referring to uniforms of the Antifa protesters. I'm not sure those are uniforms. Certainly they are often seen in all black, but I can buy black cargo pants from 511 and wear a black long sleeve shirt. I'm not sure that qualifies as a uniform.
Right. Uniform is, he might be using the term loosely. He's saying he dresses like the Antifa people dress. But if the guy was an undercover informant, he would also be dressed like that. So that doesn't really.
Sure, he would. Yeah. I mean, if he's intending to embed himself with the Antifa, then he would do that, certainly.
He's not going to dress like one of the Radio City Rockettes. That would be a giveaway.
Right. I mean, and Jimmy here talks about Antifa being a terrorist group. I think it's very difficult to label or identify who is or is not Antifa. I think, I've heard very few people actually say that they are part of Antifa. It's not an organized group with membership cards. So I'm not.
The same thing about Black Lives Matter too, right, Don? Black Lives Matter. It's not really an official membership situation. It's either
loosely organized. It's a slogan and a hashtag more than it is. I think there is an official Black Lives Matter organization. I know a lot of people who support Black Lives Matter, and I'm not sure any of them have membership cards. So it's very difficult to identify who is or is not, part of Black Lives Matter. It's a movement. And I think Antifa is also a movement of sorts that doesn't necessarily have members that are readily identifiable.
Troy is asking if you're going to vote for Trump and whether or not you support Black Lives Matter. Do you wish to answer those questions?
I am unlikely to vote for Trump. I am also unlikely to vote for Biden. I guess would be the follow-up question. I am a free thinker, not beholden to any particular political party. And I disapprove of both of those leading candidates at this point, just as I did last time around. And we'll probably go third party.
Kanye West has his first supporter in California, criminal defense hero Don Hammond.
I'm not sure about that either. I do support Black Lives Matter on a variety of levels. I'm not sure I agree with all of their tactics or, everything that movement stands for. So, but I do believe that there are racial injustices happening within our justice system and within our country that should be addressed, and that that's certainly one way of continuing down the path of progress is by things that movement is doing in many ways. There are some things they're doing that I object to.
Amy is arguing that somebody is funding these protesters, and she presents as evidence helmets that all look the same. I will add to that, from what I've heard, is they're giving out a lot of food and water at these protests. That does suggest there's some funding. I don't know that that's so nefarious, though. People usually say George Soros is the guy behind that. But these protests usually involve a coalition of groups, and different groups get funding from different sources. Sometimes unions are involved, and it could be just about anything. So I'm not sure what to make of that. Do you have any thoughts about that, Don?
Well, I think that if you research, a riot helmets that are available to the public, there's probably a very small selection. So people who want to have those sorts of things are going to end up with a very narrow range of equipment. So I'm not sure that means that somebody is buying it and handing it out to everybody. I just think everybody who orders it probably tends toward the same thing or the same style.
Eric Lau says Kanye is a lyrical wordsmith. He's talking about, they already named a wing after Kanye at the White House, so that may foretell electoral success. They are organized. They all dress the same. They intentionally do not have membership rolls. Neither did ISIS. I know these are not apples to apples, but to claim they are not organizing is wrong. Well, no, I don't know if anybody here claimed that they're not organizing at all. We just said they aren't, they don't have official membership cards.
Right. I just think it's difficult. My point is that it's difficult to prosecute them as, being members of a terrorist group or of, terrorist activities because you've declared Antifa to be terrorist. I think that's difficult to do when you can't really identify who is Antifa. I mean, it makes it a very difficult prosecutorial burden.
Well, even if they were associated with, like even if they had some membership, wouldn't they still have to produce evidence of acting in concert with other people?
For a conspiracy charge, yes, you'd have to prove that there are two or more people acting with a common goal. But a conspiracy to do what? You can't just charge a conspiracy. You'd have to have a conspiracy to commit arson or a conspiracy to commit murder or something, and then prove that each member that you're prosecuting actually played an active role in that. So it's a tough burden.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to have some trials within the next few months, and we'll see whether or not the government can meet its burden. And in the short term, we have this controversy over whether or not the federal officers even have authority to be performing law enforcement activities as they are performing them in American cities.
We shall see.
All right, Don. If you are a terrorist or any sort of a criminal defendant, it's donhammondlaw.com, and Don is standing by, ready to be your hero. That's not why we do these podcasts, but nonetheless, he wouldn't object if you called him. Would you, Don?
I would not. The phone lines are open. Call now. No, I'm not that kind of guy.
All right, Don. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon. Take care, everybody. We love you. Summer of Love.
Fight on.